then I'll call to order the October 23rd, 2024 meeting of the Elementary School Building Committee. This meeting is being recorded. It's being carried out in accordance with the governor's, well, I can read it all. It's the executive order that was thereafter incorporated into an act of the legislature, which has been extended several times and then has now been extended through, I believe it's March 2025, if I'm correct. But it's been extended nonetheless, and I usually print this part out, but it allows us to carry on this meeting virtually in accordance with that order. And the first requirement of which is that all votes and all roll calls be done, or all attendance be taken by roll call vote. So when you hear your name, members of the building committee, if you could audibly signify that you are here. Joe Buckley.
Here.
Stephen Cavey. Diane Dolan. Jake Dorr. Thought I saw Jake, no. Sandra Gropey. Joyce Husseini has been replaced. I don't have him on my list. Dennis
Rigo. Dennis Rigo.
Dennis Rigo.
I'm here.
Dennis, it's R-E-I-G-O, right?
R-E-G-O.
R-E-G-O.
Yeah.
Nice Portuguese name.
Thank you.
I apologize, Dennis. I didn't update my list with your name. That's
no
my
worries.
fault entirely. Dennis Rigo's here. Katie Monahan.
Here.
Catherine Weiss.
Here.
Dr. Baeta is here.
Present.
TJ Recupero here. Melissa Lynch, I did see.
Here.
Eileen Sprague has been replaced. Heidi Perkins.
Here.
Pat Yanikoski.
Here.
Leo Fay.
Here. 12 present,
3,
Mr. Chairman.
4, 5. Say that again, Joe.
12 present.
Great. Which brings up one item on the agenda. And I forget where I put it, but we'll bump it right up to the top if nobody has a problem. If there's no objection, I'm going to bump item 3 up to item 2. Just going to swap those out. So we do have two new members of the building committee, and Dr. Baeta, why don't I toss off to you so you can do the introductions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, thank you to the entire committee and then Mr. Coulter's office for accepting these recommendations. With us tonight, we have Pat Yanikoski, resident of Stoughton, and Leo Fay, resident of Stoughton. Both Leo and Pat have been actively involved in the Stoughton public schools for decades, not only as parents and grandparents, but also as elected members, as former school building committee members, and have always been what I would call folks that take a look at everything that's taking place and then make good decisions for the future of the community. So I just want to thank Leo for taking the time away from his busy schedule, and Pat as well. For the record, Pat and I served on the school committee for 6 years back when we were both very young and didn't know what we were doing, but it was a good run. And Leo just spent time also on the high school building committee. And so we thought that they would both be great assets to this committee. So I welcome both of them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Leo was also, were you on the fire station subcommittee that studied the Fano Drive site for a fire substation, Leo?
Yes, I was on the fire station committee for a while, up until, I think it was about a year before the fire station was completed and the Prospect Street purchase was done. So
Right.
Yeah.
Super. Well, welcome to you both. We do meet every second Wednesday of the month. This month was a little hairy because the finance committee had meetings last Wednesday and the Wednesday prior, so we had to bump it till this date. But I thought it was important that we do have an October meeting, and assuming we don't run into any issues on November, we'll have it the second Wednesday in November and continue on with that schedule. We don't have a huge agenda. There are a couple things to update on, but I'll move, since I swapped them around, I'm going to move to item 2 on the agenda is public comment. This is a period of time when we invite people from the public to address the committee with any comments or questions, nothing that we can answer or discuss at length during this meeting, or certainly not vote on this meeting, but something that we can take into account for future agendas. And we always welcome people to address the committee. So Eric will, for those who do want to speak, Eric will, you don't have to do anything by activating a microphone or anything, do you, Eric?
Yeah, we do have microphone activation on, so if anyone wants to speak, I think I saw 2 attendees, Melanie and Megan, but Megan might have dropped. So
you just click the raise hand button at the top of your screen. That will indicate that you wish to address the committee, and you get, if you could keep it under 2 minutes, we'd appreciate that. Does anybody wish to address the committee?
you did just quick note. I think we gained Jake a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I'm here.
Great.
I think just saw.
Anybody, last call for anybody who wishes to address the committee with questions or comments? Hearing none, we'll move on. Next item on the agenda. Acceptance of minutes. If nobody has any objections to this, I'd like to table this to next meeting. I didn't read them. I don't know who else did, but I do like to go through those before I vote on them. But if everybody else is comfortable, feel free to make a motion. If there's no objection, we can stick it on the November agenda. Hearing no objection or motion, we'll move on to item 5. Item 5 is invoice package. We have one invoice for Vertex. This was dated September 30th, 2024 for $29.45 and 50 cents. It's in the invoice package that Eric sent out, and that's invoice number 119-27. Does anybody have any questions or comments? The backup should be in your email package also. Hearing none, is there a motion? Oh, and we should have one coming for DRA for November, just to prepare you all. At least one. They have some charges for geotech and perhaps some work for some plans and materials done after the vote between then and now that we've asked them to do, that were probably not within contract specifically, but we asked them to do some stuff for us, and I think it's fair that they be paid for that, of course. Is there a motion to pay the Vertex invoice for $29.45.50, invoice number OPM 11927?
Mr. Chairman, Joe Byetta, move the motion, please.
Great. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Great. I'm going to have a roll call vote when I say your name, if you can say aye or nay. Joseph Buckley.
Aye.
Stephen Cavey. Diane Dolan. Jake Dorr.
Yes.
Sandra Gropey. Dennis Rigo.
Aye.
Katie Monahan.
Aye.
Catherine Weiss.
Aye.
Dr. Baeta.
Aye.
TJ Recupero votes aye. Melissa Lynch.
Aye.
Heidi Perkins.
Aye.
Pat Yanikowski.
Aye.
And Leo Fay.
Aye.
Did I miss anyone? Great, that's a unanimous vote with, now we're up to 13, right? 3, 6, 9. Yeah. All right, great. So the next item we have on the agenda is project update. I have something brief, and then Carl said he had something. Why don't we get my stuff out of the way, because it's more just sort of fluff on what we've done since last meeting. Were a couple events that I did go and stand behind a table and answer questions if they came up. That was Stoughton Day. That was held, I think, I want to say well, I forget the date, to be honest with you, but it's September 20th, if I remember. I know there are a couple people on here who could correct me, but don't bother. But Stoughton Day, which was a great time and a great audience. A lot of people came by. A lot of people asked questions. And also the Pumpkin Patch event at South School this past weekend, which I'd never been to, and had a ton of people coming through there and seeing a table that said, ask me about the school project, and many people did. And I'd like to thank the South School PTO for providing Halloween candy that I didn't, and also setting up the table. Because not being there before, I didn't know what we were supposed to bring. But it was great. Ton of people, a lot of people interested, a lot of people who were supporters prior to, and many people who went through and asked questions and didn't know much when they passed the table, and hopefully left with a full head of information. So, and on the item 7 coming up, public outreach, we'll get into what I'd like to do or like to talk about for plans going forward on public outreach and roadshow. But that's what we've done since then. Also, you will note that there is a special town meeting coming up in November. And there is an article that is school related, of course. This is an article that was put forward by the supporting group that was the petitioner is Mrs. Jakes, Lori Jakes, who was petitioned for the article. And without giving the specifics that I don't have in front of me, the text of the article says in general terms, asking town meeting for a vote to request the select board to submit the debt exclusion on a second ballot. And I don't think it identifies the April town election as the date, but as a matter of fact, I know that it doesn't. However, that is the target date that we've discussed here in the past and that we've discussed offline with the town manager, so that we don't have an additional expense for a special election. It'll just be a new question on a annual town election ballot on the first Tuesday in April. And that's really, until we get into what we're going to do going forward, that's really the sum total of what we've done to this point. At that, unless there's any questions, hearing none. I guess, Carl, you had an update?
Sorry, let me unmute myself first. A few weeks ago, I attended, along with Joe Buckley, the independent, what's it called, working group that the town manager assembled, along with the superintendent, who I guess is on that committee, right, Joe? And
I'm not, just for correction, I am not, I did not put the committee together, and I'm not a member of the committee. I'm a guest like you were.
okay. And at that meeting, and subsequently, it was discussed, that more detail, more specifics was needed as to, what a no vote would require, particularly the strategy of relocating everyone from the South School into modular classrooms and redistributed to other sites in the town. And so in response to that, I put together some, and obviously wondering what the cost of that would be, so that people had a little bit more specifics to compare and to understand, what a no vote means. Can I share the screen, Eric? Is that
Sorry.
possible?
Yeah, you should be able to. There you go.
Yeah. Put it in this mode here. So this is essentially what and we offered to help directly, in discussion with the superintendent, so that the objective is to get this information, or at least a summary of it, into their report, the independent working group's report, as to what a no vote might entail, so that people are better informed. So the thought was, rather than invest in the work at the South School to try to bring that up to code, what if the students and teachers of that building were redistributed, and obviously, through redistricting, to the other existing schools in town. And so, using the current enrollment of 307 students or so, we did some quick calculations as to how many classrooms would be needed, what other supporting spaces, and what other sites could possibly take some modular classrooms, modular buildings to house this additional space. And, without much study here, obviously we're trying to turn this around fairly quickly. We developed this information, I think, over a week ago now, or more. If there were approximately 16 classrooms provided, that would accommodate the 307 students that are, currently enrolled at the South School, including, a couple of kindergarten rooms and 14 general classrooms. At some, you can see the 18 per kindergarten, 20 per general classroom gets us there. And this is a possible distribution. I'll show you some plans in a moment that, we could say of these 16 classrooms, perhaps Daw and Gibbons are the larger sites, and they have larger playgrounds. But there was some space at the Hanson School as well. And knowing that redistricting might be part of this plan, the thought was, can we spread it around and not overload Daw and Gibbons? So if we were able to get, say, 6 classrooms at Daw, 6 at Gibbons, and 4 at Hanson, that would equal the required 16 classrooms. Each of these additions might include some additional space, certainly toilet rooms for the additional students, and some special ed space, and some other related spaces. But it obviously does assume, and you'll see, that no other enhancements, renovations are made to the existing schools. So even though you're adding, say, whatever it is, 118 students to Daw, we're not expanding the kitchen or the cafeteria. They would necessarily have to be, I guess, another lunch shift or something like that. We're not expanding the gym. We're not expanding the library in this proposal. We're simply trying to accommodate, the basic educational space for those 300 students or so. So here's what it would look like. Here's the current DAW site. Those who are familiar with it, there's the one-story portion of the building, the two-story classroom of the building portion, and then there's a large paved playground here adjacent to the main driveway and parking. The thought was that's about what this addition would look like in terms of size. And there is a connection point in the existing school right here, an exit coming out of the school that could be the connection point. There's a second one further to the north here as well. And if we were to look at it in more detail, there's that connection point. There's another connection point here. Here's what the modulars roughly lay out to be. I'll show you more detail in a moment. The one assumption that we're making in this very basic proposal is that this, from a building code point of view, is not strictly an addition to this school. It's basically a separate building. And so this connector is not enclosed space that connects into that. It would perhaps be just a canopy and a connecting walkway, with a ramp. It would be ADA accessible, and likewise the second way back here would be ADA accessible, because there's a code requirement that if we were to add to this building, it would trip some other thresholds of having to upgrade, most importantly, probably sprinklers and some other issues that we wouldn't want to get into. And our experience has been on other projects that if this were attached with an enclosed, connector, a building official could interpret it as being an addition that would, require those other modifications. We have not had any conversations with the building department. We're sharing this with you for the first time publicly. I've shared it with the superintendent and all, but that's it. And because this is not strictly just classroom space, there would be some toilet facilities in here. We do need to get utilities to this building. We also need to get sewer out of it. The thought is the closest sewer manhole is out here in the street, and because we wouldn't anticipate that it could flow by gravity, we'd have to put a holding tank and a pump in to collect that and pump it that far. And so we did kind of figure that much site work in. But we anticipate that electrical and water connections would be made, relatively short distance to the existing building here, through that connector piece there. And otherwise, you can see we're basically just siting it on the paved playground and not compensating with any additional site work to, increase paved playground elsewhere on the site or something like that. One small adjustment might be there's currently a gate here, which, the fire department might consider, their access around the building drivable. So there might need to be some modification to a little driveway and connection here to that paved playground to still get access to the building. The layout of the modulars themselves is pretty straightforward. It's sort of a U-shaped building because, the two connecting points to the existing school are there and there. So there's basically just a double-loaded corridor with, a kindergarten room, 5 general classrooms, 1 special ed classroom, a little bit of office space, some special ed small group spaces here. Again, this is all very, preliminary, but we did anticipate that perhaps the easiest way to handle toilet facilities is to actually have, a unisex handicap toilet room off of each classroom here, there. And as we said, those are plumbed underneath not underground really, but underneath the raised modular classrooms to a pump station and then pumped to that sewer manhole out in the driveway. It's roughly about 11,000 square feet for these 6 classrooms. And, it's I know it's technically 7 when we count the special ed spaces and so forth. And using some fairly recent numbers and a lot of estimates and assumptions in terms of, the cost of site work, the cost of connections, the cost of the amount of escalation, we did project that this construction, including the connectors, the ramps and canopies, is somewhere in the vicinity of $7.5 million. If you add some contingencies and fees and so forth, you could say the project cost is about $9 million for this one piece. The one at the Gibbons is going to be very similar. It's similar in size, a little variation in layout. As you can see, it still connects into the building with a covered canopy at that connection point back here. But because of the configuration of the driveways here on the Gibbons site, the other connection point is basically outdoors into this. It would look like this and this one. So here the corridor runs and comes out of the end of the building. There'd be a ramp at that point and a connection outdoors at this end, a covered connection at this end, in the same basic 6 classrooms. Here, the nearest manhole that we could determine, and again, without doing much research, but we did have access to some existing plans. The existing sewer manhole is down this end of the site, so there would be a force main, some 500 feet or so from this construction to reach that manhole there. Otherwise, the electric and water utilities and computer networks and all would be coming through the connector back to the existing school at that point. So here's the layout again, very similar, a little bit of a tweak where the corridor comes out the end of the building. But again, it has 6 basic classrooms, a full-size special ed classroom, and then some office space, some special ed space in each of these, and these self-contained toilet rooms as part of those spaces. And again, same 11,200. This one, because of the longer sewer, is about a little bit more, 7.6, 9.1 million project cost. And then the Hanson is a much tighter site in a way where we could connect into the building here. It's really at this point here. We didn't want to cross the driveway around the building. We didn't want to interrupt this parking and so forth. So this one is a much more straightforward, just literally 4 classrooms with associated toilet rooms and a small connector, but that's it. No other support spaces, no other special ed spaces. It's literally just 4 classrooms. And here the sewer connection is in West Street, has to get from the modulars down to that point as well. And again, we would anticipate, even though it is downhill, just to be safe, I think we might have to pump it a portion of the way to get there. It literally, as we said, just a double-loaded corridor extending the existing corridor out of the building down a ramp and 4 classrooms. So because it's smaller, 4,000 square feet or so, it's about 3.3 million, 4 million project cost. And if you add all those up, it's 22 million, 22.2 million. And again, we'd want to be very careful and do a lot more research before these get finalized, but this is an order of magnitude number. And just to sort of put things in perspective, this is what we're talking about. Temporary, so-called temporary modulars. Now, whether, they'd be only a year or 2 is highly unlikely. We're not quite sure what the scenario is when these would be deployed, but they could be there for, who knows, 10 years or longer. But this is typical kind of construction of what temporary modulars and what we priced look like. They're kind of raised up on sort of temporary foundations. They have these kind of ramps and entrances because of that, and then you put a skirt just to cover that, but the floor is up at this level. So those utility pipes and things are underneath there. It does get insulated. They typically have these kind of heating and air conditioning units. That's actually one advantage, some people say, because modulars are generally air conditioned. Sometimes the elementary school classrooms are not. And inside they're pretty basic. you can specify, sometimes these have larger windows in this model, but you still can furnish them more or less like a typical classroom. They have fairly low ceilings, but they're about 850 square feet or so. They match up pretty closely to existing size classrooms, typically. But there are such things as permanent modulars. They can be, you can see these are now sitting down on the ground because they have more permanent foundations. They can be a little bit more luxurious finishes or higher ceilings. They're basically built to suit, not relocatables. They're not coming from some other site generally. They're made, to order. They can even be 2 stories, even though for what we're considering here, I don't think that makes sense, but they can do that, just to let you know that. So that's kind of the sum of what I wanted to share with you all, and what I've shared with the superintendent too, so that they could report back to the working group. You're muted there, TJ, if you're trying to respond. Sorry.
No, apologies. I see a bunch of hands up. I did see Diane's hand up first, so then I'm just going to go at random because hers is the only one I'm sure I saw first. So Diane, do you have a question?
You have to unmute, Diane.
Diane, you there?
TJ on my side. Tim is next.
Well, why don't we go to Tim and then I'll go back to Diane after that. So we're not. Tim,
So sure. Hi, everyone. I just think the couple of comments first. I think Carl, the nicer ones you showed at the end, I think we should point out that's a premium for those kinds of units versus
exactly.
The more utilitarian one. We're just doing a major modular project for Watertown because they had to relocate their high school into modular buildings or portions of it in order to be able to build a current high school, which is on the exact same footprint as the new high school's on the exact same footprint. So the lessons that I think we've learned there, first of all, it is expensive, quite a bit, and you need the same kinds of requirements as you would for a permanent build. Modulars don't have any relief from the building code or anything like that. The big thing that I want to make the point is that while these are budgets and estimates, that market is, because it's not that many players, can be very volatile because it somewhat is a very highly supply and demand market. So sometimes you can find used ones or secondhand ones and get a really good deal, but other times if the market is particularly busy for those modulars, you can pay quite a premium. Like, I think in Needham they were surprised by how much they had to pay for modulars to the tune of like 50% more than they thought. So I think I just would be careful about drawing too many conclusions. I think this is great what Carl has done with this and what DRA has done, but the pricing part of it is still very quite conjecture, or premature or preliminary.
Diane, you there?
Okay, I think I finally got myself unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Kyle, I have to thank you because I was there at the elementary parent night and handed out things. And the one thing that everyone said to me, and I wish we could put together now, is how much is it going to cost? What's it going to cost if we say yes? What's it going to cost if we say no? And we have not put just even one piece of paper that just kind of compares one to the other. So here's a couple of questions to you, TJ, too, because I almost called you before. The cost, and actually this is for Kyle as well, the cost of the modulars, is that per year? Is that for the next 20 years? I mean, are we talking about $9 $9 million, but it's going to multiply over the cost of the next few years.
Our assumptions then would be that the town would buy them, not rent them. Without any other information, the time period is so indefinite that, in our understanding, Tim, maybe you know too, that anything longer than like 2 years, maybe 3 years, it pays to own them rather than rent them. And so it seems highly likely that if the town were to undertake this, you'd have them at least for 3 years. So I think so. Our pricing was on the assumption that you would own them.
Okay. So basically that's all we have there is modules. And I want to give a shout out to my boss, Mr. Baeta, because when he came in front of finance, he listed a whole bunch of costs that were going to happen that I would love to see on one piece of paper that we could give everybody, because it was all the costs if we said no. And I think a lot of people out there don't realize that it's going to cost probably about three quarters of what it's going to cost for the new school, for an old school. Plus the other things we haven't thought about. If we do these modulars, is it going to be a principal at each of the 3 schools to go over this? Is there going to be a nurse? Is there going to be some admin people? To say nothing of the software that's going to have to be adjusted to accommodate all of these kids in all of these different buildings. So I think just doing a cost analysis of the TJ, might be a really good way to go. We have town meeting coming up, a 1-page document that we can hand out to everybody and say, okay, you don't want to vote yes, but this is what's going to cost you if you vote no. And none of that is reimbursable. I think there was one thing that Kyle said might be reimbursable, but and I think that was the biggest questions that I got when I was there, that said, we just don't know. Along with, we thought everybody was going to go vote yes, and so we didn't go vote. But I will tell you, the no people are out there. They are doing their homework. They have been around collecting signatures for other things. So I think this is got to be a high priority, to get a one-page document that says yes and no on it with all the costs. Kyle, I wish I could find. I could not find in my set of slides the one you did with all the costs. It's not in my slide show that you did. The one that it was at the South. The night at the South School, you had it up there on the screen.
I'll check that, Diane. That had the base repair cost, you mean?
No, it just talked about the 66 million and what it was going to. I'm trying to visualize the slide in front of my face. But it would be great to have that for part of the yes vote, and then all of this other, because there's a lot more that people, and I have to tell you, Joe, when he went through the whole list of stuff that was going to cost, and you know what, it's going to be pretty comparable. So, all right, that's my 2 cents.
Excellent. So, how about Dr. Baeta and then Joe Buckley?
I'll defer to Joe Buckley. He's much better at this than I am. And I'll go after him.
Yeah. Carl, I had a question about the your sketches. You assumed that we're going to tie into the existing electrical system. Has it been verified that the capacity of those systems is large enough to accommodate it?
No, we haven't done that kind of level of work, Joe. This is very conceptual right now. So.
Sure. So there could be an additional cost there.
Yeah, good point.
What about water service?
There is some work going
service?
on at Gibbons. There's work going on for the electrical service for Gibbons and for Dog right now to increase the size and the capacity for those 2 buildings, but I can't speak to Hanson.
That's for the unit ventilator work.
But for the current facilities, we're adding considerable power with these additions. So
we can check on that.
Yeah. Same with water and fire service. I don't know if the fire department, because obviously you haven't checked if they're going to require additional fire service on site.
Yeah, it could be those two larger additions. The portables are more than 7,500 square feet. Technically, they could require sprinkler systems in those buildings, in those outbuildings. Yeah,
And those costs are not yet accounted for.
no,
Correct. Okay. Thank you.
thanks, Joe.
Great. Dr. Baeta?
So let me go in order of the notes I have from this, and I'll be brief. One, as a superintendent of schools, the idea that in Massachusetts in this day and age that I'm going to support an open entry elementary school concept, I would never support it as superintendent. I would vote no on this committee. I would vote no as a taxpayer, and I would speak up against it at town meeting. The idea that in today's day and age, we're going to have open canopy kind of areas under safety, weather, and everything else, I just couldn't support. So I'm just going on the record to that. And of course, my bosses, but the school committee would oversee my decision, and I'd have to stay silent to it and to them. But in this day and age, I just don't understand how an open canopy area could be supported. Except if you're a no voter. Second, currently, 2 libraries, one at the South and one at the Hanson, are already being utilized as classrooms, and those are not accounted for in this design. 2 or 3 classrooms over the next 2 fiscal years at the Wilkins, the Hanson, and the South for special education will need to be accounted for and are not in this project design. Carl wouldn't have had that information. And 3, at least 1 or 2 more classroom spaces for ELL would have to be accounted for as part of this project. So that's a total of a minimum of 5 to a maximum of 7 more spaces that we're not accounting for as part of this because of the increased enrollment. Third, the idea that we can go around ADA and fire safety by an open canopy instead of being considered an addition to the building. I mean, I'd love to put an addition into my house without having to follow fire code and all of that. So the idea that we can circumvent ADA and circumvent sprinkler systems in a school because it's an open canopy and not considered an addition is something we need to really have a discussion with the town of Stoughton, in my opinion. Which, why would we do that? Without actually looking at the safety of the rest of that building by adding all of these more bodies into that building. Remember, at some point, another X number of students are going to be in a cafeteria, in a gym, than those buildings have ever been accounted for. Think about that for a second. 4, we could always say, and I'm saying this as a friend to the committee, that modulars are outside the scope of the building committee to begin with. The building committee has been put together for the purposes of an SBA project, yet we've been asked to also provide information to a third party as it pertains to all of this. 5, only in Stoughton would we want to buy a used car for students. I'll leave it at that. 6, a comparison about a new school of modulars is simply a kick the can mentality, which Stoughton has a absolute history of, and I can only say that as a taxpayer.
Mm-hmm.
And 7, let's do a cost analysis. As the superintendent of schools, I can assure you that between transportation, safety, specialized programs, lunches, recess issues, that we're looking in excess of $2 million to the operating budget. Because we're taking an entire side of town and saying we no longer populate you in a school in that side of town. We're going to move all of you into these 3 buildings and or redistrict, which means that the redistrict goes from this to literally this.
Mm-hmm.
It's an angular redistricting of students and populations from all of our buildings. And then lastly, added to that, there's no long-term plan for the Jones School as there is currently for the Jones preschool going to the Wilkins. The Wilkins would have to remain as an elementary school, K-5, and with different students probably going there depending on the shift. And the Jones School would cost you millions of dollars, non-MSBA money, because A, it's an administrative building, and B, it's a preschool money building. There's no MSBA concept in that. That's direct cost to the taxpayers, because you wouldn't be able to move those students. So therefore, you would have to upgrade that building. We're down to one boiler in that building as of just a few months ago, and we're already concerned about that. So we would have to spend some further money on a preschool site, which, by the way, currently has 90 students on a waiting list for the first time in its history. Think about that. And has upgrades that are needed within those classrooms and facilities that long-term will cost the local taxpayer millions upon millions of dollars. So those are just 7 to 8 items that this concept is yet to address. And that's because Carl and his crew, thank you to them, got a phone call from me and said, give me a, magnitude of cost, big up top. And it's now currently, even at that, missing millions upon millions of dollars of things that need to be addressed before it even goes forward. Thanks for the time, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Anyone else? I had a couple questions, but I want to make sure everyone else has their questions answered before I monopolize anything.
Patricia has her hand up. Pat has her hand up.
Yes.
TJ.
Oh, I'm sorry, Pat. Pat, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, TJ. I am also a member of the elementary school working group, which is gathering facts and putting them together. So in a partial answer to Diane's question, we are putting documents together. One will be a longer narrative, and the other will be a 1 or 2 page document, basically saying, if yes, this is what happens, and if no, that's what happens. We're just now getting the information on the modulars from Dr. Baeta. But the document I'm talking about is not going to go into great detail like Dr. Baeta just gave us. But it will be kind of a roadmap, a basic roadmap relative to yes and no votes. Those documents are just being put together now. They'll be published in a couple of weeks, so they're tentative as I speak. But I thank Diane for that feedback. It's very important, and we are working on it as well as the school department.
Thank you, Pat. Jake. Actually, I'm going to go in the order of the list. I'm sorry, Jake. Heidi.
Thank you. For Carl, I just wanted to know on some of the items that may have been included or not included for the FF&E. Is that assuming new FF&E or moving the old stuff from the other schools, number one? Does it assume that card readers, cameras, whiteboards, and all of that are installed? Is that all an all-in price?
It does not include the furniture, Pat. That's, Heidi, that assumes that, stuff is moved from the south. There was no allowance for that. As far as technology, there is some allowance for technology, and including whiteboards and monitors, that sort of thing. Basic furnishings in every classroom from a technological point of view.
Okay, so thank you for that. My next question is, and we know how Dr. Baeta feels about the outside entrance, but for other people who might see this and be thinking that's, perfectly fine with them, my question is, and I'm sure there will be some who come back to us with that. Would the kids and the staff, but the kids going in and out for lunch, gym, etc., how would they get in and out of the other door? Assuming that there's a swipe card on the actual existing building, if one of the kids came in late, was going back and forth, whatever it was, did that mean that they would have to have a swipe card to get in and out of that building? Both buildings?
I don't know exactly how you choose to operate it. I could give you a little example. My wife was a kindergarten teacher who taught in modulars for, I don't know, 4 years or so. The kids didn't go anywhere without the teacher. They were always accompanied. And, there were toilets in the modular, so they didn't have to leave the building for that. So, no, the kids didn't have swipe cards, but the teachers did.
So,
yeah.
So in this scenario, if one of the kids needed to go to the nurse,
yeah.
the classroom teacher would have to actually physically leave that building.
Or an aide, yes, would accompany the kid down to the nurse, right? Yeah.
And swipe through.
Or vice versa. If there was an extra adult in the main building in the nurse's office who could come get the kid, that's typically what happened. Yes, Heidi.
Okay, so assuming that there might be some ice on that ramp, which there will be at times, or a little bit of.
No, there's a canopy over it, so hopefully it keeps the snow and rain off. But yeah.
Is that proposed to be a fully enclosed canopy?
Again, just to be conservative, it was not fully enclosed. It had a canopy to keep the weather, the elements out, but it's open air.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then my next two questions are, with the flat roof, what would snow removal look like? Drainage, icicles? Really, if we got 2 feet of snow, does that mean that our staff have to shovel off that roof? And where would all that drainage go? It looks like it would fall right on the recessed parking lot and be constantly freezing over.
Yeah, there's certainly details that need to be worked out from a site work point of view in terms of drainage, but it is generally handled that it's not a flat roof. It actually has a low slope to it that pitches to gutters around the perimeter, and the gutters have rain leaders, yes, that sometimes just spill onto pavement. Depends on where the nearest storm drains are. There's some more detailed drainage civil engineering that would have to be done to make those connections.
Okay, my last question, which is financial. If the town decided to go this route, and you said that there's the permanent type and there's the temporary type. Typically, to go out to bond and borrow 10, 20, or 30-year bond is not often going to be offered on something that's temporary. So do you know, or is it, or in your group know, in your experience, if towns go with the permanent type, really, do they look at a 30-year bond like they would on a new building? I'm assuming not, because I don't even know what they
I would doubt it. I would think it's, 20 years at the most if they have to borrow on the lifespan of these things. Yeah.
Right. And then I think on a temporary or a used one, I'm not even sure if a bank would bond for the borrowing.
Typically that would come out of, some other funds, I think, but
yeah, free cash, potentially. So
again, it points out it's not apples to apples by any means with new construction.
Right. So as I'm saying is the town may need to fully come up with the money in cash ahead of time, or have a short-term bond and still have to fork over a lot of cash for the first number of years, because typically a bonding agency and a bank are not going to write a bond for long-term debt service on something that is not permanent. So I think the annual impact to the taxpayers would really need to be calculated, maybe by town hall, talking to a bond counsel, and actually say not just what is the cost, what is the annual cost on your tax bill with used versus permanent versus a building. Because if people are looking for the overall cost, that's one thing. If they're looking, how is this going to impact me immediately in the next 5-10 years? That could be a completely different outlook. So I think it's really important that the group somehow or another try to get those numbers pulled together. If we're going to be showing these options, we need to be showing the tax impact and over how many years and really what it would look like on the tax bill. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you, Heidi. Jake?
So no, just a couple things really quickly. Heidi brought up the point about like the moving. I don't know how much stuff could actually be moved from the South School into another building. So just to put that out there as a comment in terms of furnishing, most of that stuff is not new, and I sincerely doubt most of that stuff would move easily from that building to any other site outside of a limited amount of technology. So just putting that out there. Dennis knows what it looks like when you put things in the walls at the South School. They don't come out again. And then, sorry, Dennis. And then the other thing was, Carl, I appreciate the projections with the enrollment. I just sometimes question whether those numbers are accurate as of October of 2024. But if you looked at June of 2024, when I ended last year, there was 20 more kids than that number. I mean, I currently have 17 classrooms, not 16. I also have a sub-separate program. So I guess to just reiterate Dr. Baetta's point, just the South School alone, my numbers fluctuate on the year. So depending on when we're doing this, I'm actually at a low point right now. But my number of enrollment typically trends about 20 to 30 kids annually between September and June. So I would guess that I'll probably around 330 by the end of the year if things go the same way they normally have done. I mean, I've been at the school for 4 years. My number was 248 4 years ago, and it was almost 320 at the end of last year. So my numbers are not going down. So I think when you're looking at the South School and then dividing that enrollment up into other buildings, and this really isn't you, Carl, like it's not a reflection on what you did. I think it's just hard to project that out. Like, I just think it's a lot bigger than that number, realistically. So I just wanted to add that point as well.
Great. Yeah, it's a good point that, again, it's not comparing apples to apples when we look at the capacity of the proposed new school versus the capacity of this kick the can option. They're not comparable.
Thank you, Jake. Is there anyone else? If not, I have a few questions. Carl, first, can you bring up the aerial of the DAW with the overlay on that?
Let me share again. Of the DAW. See that, TJ?
Yeah, got it.
Okay. I can enlarge it, I'm sorry.
Yeah, please.
So that's the overall site, more or less.
With the overlay, with the modular overlay.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Okay.
It may be too. I didn't actually revisit the site recently. This area back here that in this aerial shows something, a playground. I believe that may be still a playground, but in the Gibbons, I think there was an area like this that subsequently got paved to expand. So there may be more playground there than exists, but this was the latest aerial.
I think that was the former tennis courts at the Gibbons that have since been made into.
Yes.
So I have a few questions, and one is related to that. What I just had asked you to bring up, but I'm gonna go through by importance in my mind, at least. So I see, as I do the math on each of these, I see you're carrying like between 17 and 18%, like 17.5%, or excuse me, 1.75% additional beyond construction costs per modular, about that. So it's
to get the project cost.
Yes, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's something in the vicinity of 20%.
Yeah, something like that. I want to say. So my question, like Heidi hit on to one of them, what of that is FF&E, if there's anything? And I know these are all just rough numbers for ballpark estimates, but.
Yeah, there was no loose furniture in this. The assumption was you'd move things over.
So in what you have on the screen, for example, and there's about 3.3 million in versus construction costs and total project costs with all three modulars. So, I mean, looking at individually or collectively, it doesn't matter. What is not included in the gap? I imagine there's contingency for sure.
Contingency and fees, essentially.
Well, that was going to be my question. There must be some design fees. There must be some OPM fees.
Yes.
And those would work about 5% each, 7.5, something like that for designer.
Collectively, yeah, it depends on, your risk tolerance in terms of how much contingency you'd want to carry. But I guess you could say somewhere in the vicinity of 10% in contingency at this point, and 10% between other fees, architect and OPM.
Okay.
And that's the 20%. So very, very rough numbers.
Oh, so that's so like what you have on the screen there, 9.0 versus 7.5, that includes roughly an OPM fee and a designer fee.
Yes. That's what's in the difference between the construction cost and the project cost.
Is there any other cost beyond that isn't factored in?
What you just heard, maybe if we want to buy all new furniture, that's another $1 million or something.
I imagine there'd be some that we would have to buy, like smart boards, for example. Imagine
yes, you'd get a typical whiteboard. You wouldn't get a smart board. Right. That would be either relocated or bought new out of another budget.
Okay.
Just like computers these days, you tend not to put those in, to the project cost.
That is
they
one
don't last
item
20
that
years
can
or
move.
30 years.
That is one item that can move, TJ. The smart boards.
Yeah.
Okay. What else, Jake? If you can, desks and chairs, those can move for sure. But what else off the top of your head do you think couldn't move? And I should say to Joe, I'm with you entirely. I hate this. I would never vote for it. I'll stand up and speak against it, but I'd like to know that what we're saying is based on, a thorough investigation because, under MSBA regs, even though this wasn't our charge, what the regs do ask us to do is find a solution. And I'd rather be able to say that we looked into all solutions and disqualified them because, so that's the point behind my questions.
TJ, I think my only comment is that anybody who sees this cost is not going to accept that the cost later on does not include things like new furniture, which a new area should be getting, and not literally the 1960s furniture, 70s furniture that the South currently has, and so on and so forth.
Look, I'm with you entirely. I'll chain myself to town hall before I allow my town to do something like this. But having said that, so I want to ask about teachers. So we have, like Hanson, for example, 4 new classrooms. So 4 teachers move over there. And each of those, I know in elementary schools, particularly, teachers consider their classroom their office. They set up there. That's their permanent space. Do we have enough ancillary and support space for teachers, such as these 4 teachers added to the Hanson School? I can't imagine would be overload, but there's a breaking point in some of these schools, I would imagine, where space gets tight.
Yeah, so if you look at the Hanson School, this is a perfect example, TJ, that you asked. If you look at adding more staff at the Hanson School, now you're looking also at the teachers lounge. You're looking at the copy center. You're looking at all of that stuff that's literally cost above and beyond just putting 4 classrooms over there. I think the biggest component of this, beyond the teachers, which is very, very important, is the idea that all 3 schools would have to look at adding a lunch. That's for those of us that have been principals, that is not just adding a lunch. You have to look at numbers. You have to look at time of the day. You could literally have an elementary school in Stoughton have to start lunch at 10:15 in the morning in order to do 4 lunches instead of 3 lunches, or the reverse. they're eating at 1:15 in the afternoon, and they get out at 2:45. I mean, that's what happens when you run a school. You have to think. I'm sorry, I had my camera off. You have to think about that. You have to think about what that means. So when you're just moving bodies and physical space into a space, cafeteria, kitchen, that's built for 400 kids, and you're adding 100 more, you literally then have to make a schedule that says, when does kindergarten and grade 1 eat, when does 2 and 3 eat, when does 4 and 5 eat. That's typically what you see. Now you're saying, well, wait a minute, all of those have become bigger. So you might have a K1 half of 2, a half of 2, 3, a 4. It all depends on the class sizes. But literally at the high school level, what usually happens is you always have, and you would have to do this at the elementary now because you're adding the space to the same physical kitchen space, or if you will, cafeteria space. You're looking at a fourth lunch if you only had 3, or you're looking at a third lunch if you're having 2, which means the time of the day when kids are having lunch, you could have kids walking in the building at 8:10, starting school at 8:30, and having lunch at 10:30. First lunch, second lunch, third lunch, fourth lunch, or reverse. You go later instead of early, as one example.
Got it. So, and Joe, while you're on the mic, one of my other questions was, I'm assuming this would come with a town-wide comprehensive redistricting plan, along with busing all around town now, right?
Yeah, so the redistricting committee will be coming together in November for its first meeting. It'll go kind of slow, if you will, because we're trying to figure out what's happening for April. If we redistrict with modulars and all of that, we're trying to look at a start date of September of 26. If we're looking at a new school, then I think we're looking a little further out. So that'll give us more time to redistrict. But that also means by the fall town meeting, or by 26-27, by the fall town meeting, you're getting numbers move forward on modulars. And we're moving into redistricting for September 26, or 1 year later, because we're going to the Springtown meeting asking for millions upon millions. At the end of the day, when you look at the scope of the cost, tonight alone, we've mentioned millions of dollars of additions, and additions to just make it right. The second part is, that does not include a severe and significant discussion on operational costs by having to take an entire side of town that no longer is even close to a neighborhood school, and in K-6 having to provide transportation. Yes, this is a bigger item than actually saying we're building a new school. We know where it's going. It's on the south side of town. We know that causes redistricting that goes like this or like this, versus redistricting that's more of an angle, right? All of a sudden, there's nothing on the south side of town. So your most southern part of town is the Gibbons. Your most northern side remains the north, and everything's got to fit in between that. So I live on Chemung Street, and I use this example all the time. If you're on the odd side of town on Chemung Street, you vote at the Hanson. If you're on the even side of town of Chemung, you vote at the Gibbons. That's exactly what would happen in this type of redistricting. You would have to take a serious look at certain parts of town would have a neighbor across the street going to one school and the neighbor on the other side going to a different school.
Got it. So do you have a ballpark? General, very general as you can be, because I know you haven't calculated down to the dime, certainly, if not, I mean, if anything at all, just a percentage-wise range for what the increased busing may cost over your current budget for busing. And as a corollary to that, I know this isn't you, this is more of a school committee policy thing, but would that come with some discussion at least on a imposition of busing fees, or a reimposition, I should say, of busing fees?
Right. So what would happen, it's a great question. So what would happen under the state regulation in K-6 is that any student that's going to be 2 miles or further automatically gets free transportation. So we're adding bodies to our transportation costs when we take it from this redistricting circular to an angular one, because one side of town is going to require. You could have a student who currently attends, the South Elementary School end up at the DAW in a not a modular classroom, but as part of the extension. They may not be in the modular classroom, but they would be at the new DAW school that includes modular classrooms. Or you could have, depending where the heat pattern is, you could have kids who and parents who have said, well, you know, the Wilkins School is great, because here's the other discussion. The Wilkins School in the modular concept of redistricting and in this plan remains a K-5 school. That actually will probably assure even more students at the Wilkins being moved in some type of a angular redistricting than in a new school redistricting. And again, that's a hypothetical guess. But if you look at what you're trying to do, if I live over by the old Goddard Hospital in town, and I've been going to the south, I'm either going to the Gibbons or the DAW. That's more than likely what's going to happen. And it's not necessarily the Gibbons, because the rotation of all of that would mean Hanson, Wilkins, Gibbons, Hanson and Wilkins and DAW all shifting in some way. Again, depending, and I'll give this up to Courtney, who is really good at all those heat pattern stuff. That's her thing that she always puts together for us through either her or her colleagues. We're going to hire a third-party group to basically say to us, these kids are here right now. Where are they going to be when these modulars open up? Because you're not consolidating a district, you're moving an entire district and redistricting at the same time. Those are two very different ways of doing business.
Right. So that hits on one of the questions we got from someone's here, which we're not taking questions, but I think it's a good question because it sort of ties into what you were just saying. So this isn't, we're not talking about relocating just the South kids into these modulars. You're talking about redistricting townwide, and what would it be, like lottery?
No, what it would be is exactly what any redistricting would look like, which is I live at this address and I currently go to this school, and according to this redistricting plan, I'm now at this school, this new school.
But would it be restricted by grade, like all of the first and second grade kids are in modulars? Or
right. So kids don't move into modular classrooms; they move into a school, of which the school building may be a modular classroom or the regular part of the building. Right? You're not being redistricted like, oh, I'm going to the new modular. That's not what happens. And a perfect example of that is the middle school. The middle school has kids that are flow in and out of the modular classrooms because there's a bunch of electives in that area of the building. So in this particular case, if the DAW, the Gibbons, and the Hanson have modular classrooms, then depending where you live, you are now redistricted to that building, not that modular. Depending on where third grade's going to be, fourth grade's going to be, first grade's going to be, kindergarten. One of the biggest questions in this entire dynamic is special education and EL. We know for a fact, as of this year, we're adding another specialized classroom at one of our elementary schools. We know for a fact that the following year that's happening. We know for a fact that's happening at the middle school and the high school over the next 2 years. By the way, we haven't even talked about additional space at the high school as an issue that we have to talk about in the future. So when you look at the dynamics of this, it's not about moving from my current room 1 at the South School in first grade, and now in fourth grade, I'm moving to the Gibbons modular classrooms. No, you're just moving to the Gibbons. Where your classroom is depends on how it's assigned and the relevancy of it.
All right. So I see Leo and Jake. I thought you had your hand up, but I have one more question. I have several, but just one more I want to ask, and I think I know the answer. But so I know I asked you to pull up the DAW thing. You don't have to pull it up again, Carl, but I was looking at how much play area space each of these modulars was taking up.
Mhm.
And Gibbons by far takes up more of the paved play area space, takes up probably 50% of the play area space, although it does have the former tennis courts that are sort of an annex off of the play area that could be used. But, you know, I have on my screen here, the DAW looks like it takes up at least a third of that play area space. So when I said I think I know the answer, I'm guessing that you'd have to do recess and break times, much like you talked about with lunch times. You'd have to break things up.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do those in shifts also.
More shifts. Yeah, more shifts.
Right.
Which TJ is more cost. Just want to go on the record. It's more cost because it's a safety issue, which means I have to have people out there.
Mm-hmm.
So if the teacher's contract, which it does, calls for X, and now I need an added space or an added time period, I have an added cost on the school budget.
All right. That's actually, Leo, if you don't mind, just one other quick question, because we did talk about additional cost and personnel, but Joe, what about layoffs if we had to do something like this?
So typically in a school system that would, for example, the system I came from, if we were trying to close a school because we couldn't build a school, you may be looking at layoffs. The problem with us right now, or the positive with us right now, is we have, and are one of the only South Shore communities that's not a traditional city that has a growth in enrollment, excluding the shelter discussion. So I just want to put that over there. We continue to have an increase in enrollment. And so our projections are that we will be above 4,000 students. And those projections do not include anything to do with the shelter situation. This is based on your statistics for your hometown community. We're slated to go from 3,600 when I got here to over 4,000 over the next few years. And if those numbers hold true, and we'll see if they do in the next few months, because October 1 numbers just came in, then our issue is that our enrollment is actually going up. And so therefore our space needs are even more. And I can tell you that they are based on this year. We closed the Hanson School Library. A few years ago, we closed the South School Library. We are going to have discussions about closing another elementary school's library this year. What does that mean? That means an actual physical space called the library is now at the back end of a cafeteria/hallway. It's no longer your traditional library learning space, because that space has had to been turned over into a classroom because of the increase in enrollment.
Got it. Thanks, Joe. Leo, and thank you to everybody for your patience with me and my questions. But Leo, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it, and thanks for letting me be part of the group. Dr. Baeta, to your point, if you're turning kindergartens into classrooms now, you may be looking at modular expansion no matter what if something doesn't happen, because you're going to run out of space. Something's going to have to change. I will tell you the reason I wanted to get involved in this group. I was for getting the new school built, and very much for, the town being progressive and moving forward and planning. But I felt like there weren't a lot of great answers that came out to the public. And that's where it fell short. Myself personally, I was told I hated kids because I asked these questions. Well, no, I was going to vote yes anyways. I was just trying to find all the answers that I wanted to get, and you couldn't get them. So it's good to hear that these bulletins will be going out and putting together this paperwork that Diane had asked for. But it's how it gets presented to the public. And there's a lot of information here about what will happen if we don't have the building and if it's voted down again. But I know I sat in a meeting a couple of months ago, and I think it was Carl that brought up, looking at what the proposal was for the building, that there was probably a 10% slush that could be taken off of this presentation and what the building would be. I think if this group could work on some of that, bringing down what those costs were, having a different proposal going out with this next bid, as well as all the proper information, you'll get a much different answer, because I really do believe that we're a lot of people sitting in the middle. And I know you had all the meetings. You try to watch as many as you can. You try to get that information. But I do think that there was some inappropriate responses, some stuff that was being presented that came across to the public in a bad way. And I think just providing the right information, try to tighten up that budget a little bit, clean up a few things. I myself questioned the bridge through the swamp. I mean, somebody told me we were going to spend $1.5 million to build a bridge from Park Street. Well, why couldn't that driveway come in along the right side of the South School off the existing driveway and go up through the playground next to the South School and go out into the baseball field and through? I mean, you look at it, the elevations are there. It could happen much easier than a bridge through a swamp. And those are some of the answers that nobody could give.
Thanks, Leo.
That's my feelings.
I have a brief answer on that one, though. We spent a ton of time trying to negotiate for rights in Fano Drive, and we'd have to cross that in order to get from the South School property onto this site. So we'd have to go back and revisit that to get an easement or some sort of access across that to from the existing South School property onto this site. But it is something that, that is one of the, I always had a problem with the two bridges, particularly because of the expense primarily, but I did like the idea of a bridge going in just for aesthetics and traffic control reasons, but that's my 2 cents. But Joe Baeta and then Tim.
All right, so I'm going to say something that is, I think needs to be addressed in the next couple of months by this committee. Number one, I really urge the committee to consider a full-on push for Fano Drive outside the scope of the project, different article, funded and supported, for the reasons of the following: A, in the best interest of this project, and B, in the long-term best interest of public safety for the town of Stoughton. If it costs $3.5 or $5 million for us to get a road from Park to Sumner, I can't understand why under public safety, that would be a no. And that's not an exclusion question, debt exclusion question. That's a borrowing question. We believe that the number, and TJ, correct me, is somewhere in that $4 to $5 million number, according to Tim's numbers or Carl's numbers. I may be off, but I believe it's around or less than 5 million. It should be a separate question because it has a long-term public safety positive implication to the town and doesn't need to be a debt exclusion. The idea that a police department can go, or a fire department, especially where the new fire department is being built, and get to the Sumner side of town by coming down from where it is onto Park, onto Fano Drive, and cross the way into South Stoughton will save lives. So I think we formally need to consider that option and move it forward into potentially by December 31st as an article to this town meeting in May as part of the building project. 2, I think we need an answer to what happens to the South School. So I'm going to ask that either A, we make a commitment to making sure, finding a way that within this budget we can do it, or we're asking for a secondary article, and I would say, I may be wrong, through CPC for the purposes of public land and public utilization by taking down that building. And I don't know if it can happen, and I don't know if it's legal, but using CPC money to take down that building or using an article to take down that building addressing that issue for the select board so they don't have to answer it, and creating a public space in that area of town that we currently do not have. Now that, for this one guy, is long-term planning without a direct cost to an increase in taxes to the taxpayer.
We can put that on the agenda. I do have some strong feelings on it, but we can put that on the agenda for November if you want, Joe.
I'm only suggesting it because I have pro-education folks who like the schools, who no longer have kids in the school and want to vote for this project, and they want an answer to Fano Drive and what happens to the old building. They don't want it to just be turned over to what continuously happens in town, or let me rephrase that. We have a history of in town, which is we purchase a piece of property in town and it sits there. Instead, we have a plan, and we potentially outreach to the CPC, see if they have any interest. They may have interest to say, we can't and will not support demolition of a building. But if you can find the fundings to demolition of a building, we're very much into supporting the millions of dollars that are needed for a park in that area of town that currently that area of town doesn't have. I understand the business perspective of putting that out. As superintendent, it's hard for me to not say that I really don't need any more houses going up on that side of town, especially if I'm building modular classrooms. So I'd love to have it on the agenda at least.
Sure.
Discuss, because if we have if we're gonna meet the timeline of an article, those articles are due by the 31st of December.
I will put it on the November agenda. And Eric, if you could remind me of that, just briefly, the idea, the concept of budgeting. First of all, the article that the appropriation states that, you know, this is for construction of the building on these Fano Drive parcels or any related costs. So that would be a question for bond counsel as to whether or not, I've been through this pretty extensively, whether or not we could include that in our project costs. So bond counsel would have to weigh in and tell us that the article covers that offsite component of the project costs covered under the appropriation. I think that's pretty clear.
So TJ, my question would be, is that not true of the high school project?
That was all contained on site though. So the former high school was on the same parcel that the new high school was going on. The difference is this is an offsite parcel of the, so the article identifies specifically the parcel that the new project will be going on. This parcel is not identified as included in the project cost. So the question for bond counsel would be, is this ancillary to that construction project to the extent that it can be included in?
So
and it's possible. So
for the clarity of the record, because I hear this all the time, the central office at the Jones School cost did not come out of the MSBA high school project.
But it was in the article. The article did identify a cost associated with district offices or administrative offices.
Right. But if you remember, on site, it was supposed to be built where the former central office was, which was connected.
Not in that article. It was broad enough. So I'm just flagging it as an issue that I think needs to be weighed in by bond counsel. And the other thing on this, Joe, just my own thought is, I wouldn't vote to include this in the project cost unless I had a vote from the select board as policymakers saying, yes, if the school committee took a vote that this was no longer going to be used for school purposes, then we want a vacant site. So yes, include that in your project costs, because that puts the building committee in the position of making a policy decision for the town that I'm not comfortable making. Deciding to demolish a building that, frankly, I think from a value standpoint probably devalues that parcel.
Right. So Okay, we agree. We don't agree to disagree very often, but we agree to disagree on that one.
No, I'm not saying I wouldn't be in favor of doing it. I just want policymakers to tell me, yes, do it.
So I would argue that's part of our problem right now. Part of our problem is that we are where we are because we were unable to do what the high school project did. So I'm just going to go on the record. What the hell? At the end of the day,
I get it. It was different though, Joe. It was different.
It was different because the argument is that it attaches everybody, right? It's a high school. It's not an elementary project that will target everybody, but people don't understand that. But my point is that at the end of the day, the argument is still the same. The building committee has the authority after it's voted by town meeting to make those decisions that it can. I don't want to get into an argument because you're an attorney and I'm always going to lose.
No. Well, in the end, all the building committee is doing is recommending things. But before we actually take the step of authorizing it, I would want some policy board to tell us that's what we want to do. But I looked into other projects in our cycle that were approved through MSBA to see what they paid to demolish, and the range for that is, Tim, Carl, correct me, but it's anywhere from like $1 million to $1.5 million for this size building to demolish it and dispose of hazardous materials and whatnot. Somewhere between, I think the low end I saw was about 700,000 and the high end was up near 2 million. So for this size building, I thought it was probably on the lower end between 1.5 million to the cost. So, I mean, it's potentially something we would have funds for in contingency towards the end of the project if we wanted to do, and if, in my mind, if someone instructed us to do that. So, but even the projects that I looked at where they did that, they were all examples of where they were demolishing an existing school on the same parcel where they were building a new school.
And that's the only time MSBA will reimburse for demolition.
Yeah, good point too, Joe. I didn't even, but anyway. So I don't want to, Joe, you had, and Tim, I think you've had your hand up for a while.
Well, I just want to clarify, because Leah was mentioning about, we did talk about trying to reduce the cost, if you recall. And that was prior to sort of getting the final word from the MSBA about what would be acceptable. And they, and one of the big options was to reduce that secondary access out to Haynes Road. And they basically, told us that those kinds of changes would be significant enough and would not allow us to revote the project. So that time we were trying to target the reductions, but now we're working against the fact that we're talking about a year delay to the project. So we have to deal with that cost increase, which I'm pretty comfortable that we have enough and, we'll be able to do that. But that the big reduction we were looking at, the MSBA wouldn't allow us to do. Now, I do think if we were able to go back to Fano Drive and basically recreate a secondary egress on Fano Drive, which we had originally been planning, we would be able to do that. We would be able to, do that and still
eliminate both bridges.
And eliminate both bridges, yeah. That's all. I just wanted to clarify that.
It's probably close to a wash too, right? So we have like $6 million in.
It was pretty close
bridges,
to a wash. Yeah.
So it'd probably be a wash if we did that.
Yeah.
But let's also remember the interest rates are coming down too, so they should be down another 2 points by the end of the year, hopefully. So.
Yeah, and hopefully
that can
that'll
help.
Yeah.
Cool. Anyone else have any comments, questions? Joe, do you have anything else? Go ahead.
I just want to go back to the comment that you guys just discussed. Fano Drive is more than just a secondary egress for the schools as a town. I think that discussion needs to take place at some point. We had a discussion, and TJ, you remember, you may recall, we had a discussion that the idea for police and fire there's still eight acres of land there to be built on. And I'm not suggesting it go to anybody. I'm just saying, think of the idea that the town has decided that we're going to have a cut through that cuts the town on that side of town by 50% for the purposes of public safety first. And second is an egress for the schools. And third, has anybody traveled anywhere on Park Street, Central Street, Washington Street in the last 6 months? The traffic is a disaster. And so what we're doing is we're actually supporting public safety as an opportunity to get to that area of town. I think we need to really push, and I know I'm beating I'm beating the drum, and I'm eating the horse, or whatever the common in America is. The idea is that we could be outside the scope of the article, and so therefore we need to look at opportunities for Fano Drive to be funded in a different way as a public safety article for the town. $5 million, $4 million as an article. I mean, last year they tried to cut $700,000 from the school department for sewer lines, as an example. So I'm beating the drum here, but I don't think we're thinking long-term here as a committee. We should look at funding, an alternative funding for the purposes of Fano Drive. And I would guess that could be very positive.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about a separate article for what, the next, since we won't make, I mean, there's going to be no special town meeting, I wouldn't think, between now and next spring. I'm guessing, could be, but you're thinking like a call it $5 million, just to plug in an amount. You're talking about a separate $5 million expense that would we'd put on the warrant to fund just the through roads, separate and apart from the schools.
I am, and the reason why I am is that it is not being done just for the schools. It's being done.
No, I get it. I get it. Yeah, I get it.
Yes, yes, sir. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. We'd have to revisit with the owners whether or not there'd be any, what the consideration would be, regardless of, how we would do it. But yeah, all right, we can put that on the agenda for next meeting, along with the other issue of demolition. We can do some offline research into those two issues if you want between now and then.
Hey, Jay, can I make a comment?
Sure, please, Joe. I'm sorry.
No worries. I agree with Joe Baeta 1,000%. In fact, when we having these discussions originally, I even suggested perhaps we could take a Fano Drive parcel piece by eminent domain. I agree that is the ideal situation, but I'm with TJ in that I don't know that this committee has that kind of authority. And if we had the legal authority, we need much more support from the other boards in town before we champion this action. And if you don't have the Board of Selectmen behind you, and I mean rah behind you, it's not going to happen. I don't see it happening. And to a lesser degree, perhaps the school committee, but it's really the Board of Selectmen and the town manager that really need to champion this cause. Mm-hmm. And they've been pretty silent in this whole project, actually.
Yeah.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate here a little bit, because when we were trying to get the fire station done, we did address the situation, and we brought it up to town meeting. We brought it up to the town manager. We brought it up to the school committee, and we were told absolutely not is anything else going on to that property other than the schools. And Joe, I know that's before your time, and I love you. I'm here to help you and everything. But the way it was presented, there's going to be a lot of people that remember that, because we could have had a nice public service building and a school going down that street. Instead, we wasted all sorts of money for one of the worst locations I can imagine on Prospect Street. And the people who are going to be behind it now to help you with Fano Drive will be the people on Birch Street and Gay Street, because if you see the ambulances and fire engines, I live off of Sumner. I mean, you watch the ambulance come out. First of all, they can't take a right on Park Street if there's somebody waiting to go because of the island in the middle of the street. Nothing's getting fixed there. And that's on the state. So they go down Birch Street next to Bob's, and then they cut across and down Gay Street to get out on the 138. I mean, it's a disaster, but this could have been alleviated a long time ago if the school committees had worked with everybody else.
I think that the only listen, I was part of the public safety building, and I left it, as you may recall, Leo, when we went from a public safety building to just only building a fire department, because I thought we had a great opportunity. And as superintendent of schools, I can tell you right now, I don't know what the schools are going to do with the remaining 8 acres of that land over the next 50 years. I may be totally wrong, and somebody may say I'm totally wrong. But the opportunity right now is, if we can leave the history of the one-liners that we all stand behind, including myself, to just looking at public safety. The idea that you could cut through that side of town, the idea that you're cutting up by, the old Mermax to get to that side of town or behind Bob's, it's just not feasible for large fire trucks, and yes, it is for cruisers. So my argument is that outside of the scope of my work on this building as just superintendent, it just makes a lot of sense to have a cut through in that area of town for the purposes of transportation, meaning in and out of schools for 180 days, and 2, public safety. Sumner Street is almost like a highway certain times of the week. I mean, I go to the South School. My colleague Jake, as the elementary principal, I go down there, and there's certain times of the day I can't believe how fast traffic is going on Sumner Street. I'm horrified, and I'm not a pedal to the metal guy. So, long story, I just think that we should have those discussions. And to Joe Buckley's comment, and thank you for your support, Joe. I do think it's an overreach of the committee to make a decision. I don't think it's an overreach of the committee to request that the select board say yay or nay to an idea.
Agreed.
I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that.
And they need to see, and I think we can get, without putting the 2 chiefs who I adore and think highly of, went to school with, as great people who really think about the benefit of the town. I don't think that those police chiefs would say this isn't a good idea. And I don't want to put them on the spot and speak for them, because I haven't spoken to them about this. And I don't want them to be ridiculed by their boss or the select board or any of that. So I'll never put them on the spot. But it makes a lot of sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And I don't think you get those chiefs to disagree. As a matter of fact, I'm sure you'll get their full support. My point is, we cannot do it by this building committee alone. We can recommend to the Board of Selectmen, but the Board of Selectmen not only has to support it, but they have to embrace it. They have to really get behind it. Otherwise, I don't see it happening.
Yeah, it may be, Joe, a petition article that has to come from citizens in the town and not from a actual board.
Have any of you been down there lately? There's a business running on the street.
Yeah.
I don't know how this landscaping guy got in there, but I mean,
Not
it's
legally.
yeah.
It's not there legally.
Yeah.
Happy to
He
support it
has
if it can be
ongoing
illegal.
issues with the Conservation Commission.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so Leo, just for background, we had, I think calling them extensive discussions is almost an understatement. We had dozens and dozens of hours into meetings, discussions, and I mean, we had one sort of meeting with about 15 people around the table in town hall to discuss what it would look like, what Fano Drive would look like fully built out, which, wasn't resolved, but it was, DRA led that to along with Semiotis, the engineer, to talk about things like, sidewalks, width, lighting, things like that. I mean, it's a
Drainage.
And the big obstacle was that we couldn't make a deal that was acceptable to both the committee and the owners of Fano Drive, which is a private way. That was the big obstacle. It was always our first option. And actually, if you look at our pricing in the I think everything we filed after October last year had the Fano Drive option left in it as a possibility. It wasn't included in our final costs. I know that, if you look at our cost estimates, there are like two scales for several of them. It says with Fano Drive, without Fano Drive. And so we priced it out and everything. It was, I want to say total was like $7 million we had priced out to pave that end to end. And Joe, I agree with there are almost no east-west connectors in this town on that side of town. So, and at one point I even, Courtney will laugh if she hears that, Carl, you probably will too, but I sent around, I did like a traffic pattern thing to figure out how you would get from point A in the town to this site. And there was no direct route, no matter how you did it. You either had to go all the way down Turnpike, turn onto Park, and then back up to the school site, or all the way down Sumner, up Ash, around to Park, turn left, and there were like 2 or 3 left turns across traffic to get to the school. So I don't disagree. It would be a great option for us to have. If we could do it, I'm all in favor. So
365 days, it provides public safety. For 180 days, it does public safety and transportation to schools. That's the argument.
Who else has something to say? I don't see any other hands up. Anything else on this topic? Because I think we did well to at least narrow down a discussion for November, or target some discussions for November.
Mr. Chairman, can we ask that both the town manager and the chair of the select board be part of that meeting due to the inquiry around the discussion of Fano Drive and prior to a potential article being filed?
I'm happy to bring it up to them, or if you want to, Joe, doesn't matter to me who does it. Happy to bring it up to them and tell them what we discussed. And
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to have you lead it, and I'm happy as soon as you lead it to second it and say, that I'd like to see this discussion take place.
Great. So we'll target that for our November meeting, which would be the 13th.
November 13th.
November 13th. Great. So if there's nothing further on that, I won't spend too much time, because we did have a pretty robust discussion under project update when I didn't think that there was much to update on at all. But that was all good and productive. Item 7 on the agenda is public outreach, and I think much of this will be offline, but I wanted to introduce it and get some thoughts, because we did some of this last meeting, just discussion of some of this, but I think it would be important going forward from now through April if this committee did the sort of public outreach and roadshow that we did on the high school, and reach out to community groups, fraternal groups, ethnic groups, Portuguese, Italian American, the temples and whatnot, all of which were only too happy to welcome us for a brief presentation to their members and questions and answers. So, and I think I talked to Tim about this briefly on the phone. It would be as great as it would be to have our project team there at every step along the way. I appreciate that, this wasn't part of the program that we budgeted in their contracts. So I think largely this is something that the school building committee is on its own, with support, of course. That's me speaking, by the way, not them. But, I don't want to ask them to do stuff that is beyond their contract that we're not going to have the means to pay them for. So, and I also think that we're capable of doing it ourselves. If we had a compact presentation that we could give maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then have two people at, each of the presentation, each of the groups that we present to there to answer questions. I think that would be, actually, I think it's our duty going forward that we reach out to anyone and everyone we can about the project to give proper information, answer questions, so that come April, we won't hear that people were voting no or not voting at all because they just didn't know enough. And having said that, what we did on the high school, and Tim, I think, sent out an email back probably a couple months ago saying pretty much the same thing. I think it included a list of the organizations that we targeted for the high school vote. There's probably 20, 25 groups. And last meeting, we had a handful of people volunteer, wanted to be part of that, and I have all those names somewhere amongst my notes. If that group is still interested, we can't have a quorum, of course. But if we had we have 15 members now, if we had a group of anywhere from 5 to 6 people who could meet, put together a list, and then start reaching out to these organizations and scheduling a date, and along the same time path of that, put together a packaged presentation, pretty much what we have, but tightened up because we don't want to do the full 20 slides. I don't think. I'm just speaking for myself. I think we want to do something that hits on some of the questions that people have brought up after the vote, particularly because people right now, I think, are looking for answer to certain specific questions that we can hit, and one of those is what we discussed for half of this meeting already. What's the cost if this project isn't approved? And some of that we're still honing down, but we have the answers largely to it, but some involves policy determinations from the school board. But more than anything, I want us to formalize and get going if everybody agrees. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? So I had, for the people who had volunteered last meeting, I had, again, I don't have my notes here, but I know Diane Dolan, Joe Buckley, I think you said you would be interested. I don't want to volunteer you if you didn't. I'd certainly be more than willing, and Sandra Gropey, I know she said that she would help out. And this was a group that were identified when we were discussing the back to school nights particularly. So it might be people who are available for that, but not necessarily interested in doing the outreach to the community for whatever reason, time or otherwise. So why don't I leave it this way? I'll send out an email tomorrow, or maybe even later tonight, saying if you have an interest in being part of a subcommittee for the outreach, for the building committee's outreach to the community, a roadshow, just shoot me back a yes so I can compile a definitive list and I can sort of organize a Teams meeting where we can discuss these issues. Thoughts from anyone? Joe? I see your hand up. I don't know whether that's an old hand or you're muted.
As everybody would say, that's an old hand. Sorry.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Does anybody not agree with that idea? All right, well, that's what I'm going to do. And beyond that, I don't have anything for public outreach. New business, I think Carl touched on. The only thing I was going to do is update. Might I have a comment from someone? Oh, just a note applauding our work tonight, I guess, our discussion. So, all right. So I'll look for my email on that. Next meeting is November 13th. If there's nothing else, does anybody else have anything they want to bring up under new business? Leo or Pat?
Not from me. Oh, maybe just one quick comment. The working group, when we're done with our documents, we might do a mini roadshow also.
Oh.
Perhaps at town hall, perhaps at the First Parish Church. These are not set in stone, so I wouldn't publicize it. But those plans were discussed.
Excellent. And I know the target date for finalizing that is October 31st. Is that still, I missed the last meeting, so is that the same, Pat? Is that changed at all?
We'll probably need a little more time than that.
Got it. Great. All right. There's nothing else. Thank you, Carl, Tim, Eric, Courtney, if you're on. Thank you. And to all the members, if there's nothing else from the committee, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded.
Who was the second?
Heidi Perkins.
Heidi? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to go through the roll call if you'd like.
Yeah, it's underneath all my other notes now, Joe.
Yeah, Melissa Lynch,
Yes.
Joe Buckley.
Yes.
Yes.
Catherine Weiss. Dennis Rigo. Yes. Joe Baeta, yeah, aye. TJ.
Yes.
Diane Dolan. Pat Yanakowski.
Yes.
Katie Monahan.
Yep.
Leo Fay.
Yes.
Heidi Perkins.
Yep. Yes.
Jake Dorr.
Yep.
Unanimous, Mr. Chairman. And if it's not, we're going to leave them by themselves.
Thank you all. Have a great night. See you in November.
Thanks, Carl and group.
Have a good night, everyone.
See you all.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.